Hey everyone and welcome back. So today's video is going to be me talking about some of the books that I rated 3 stars during the time that I wasn't on Booktube. Now I think I don't know how many books I read, just scrap what I was about to say. 11 of the books that I read during that time I gave 3-star reviews, but I'm not going to talk about all of those books. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do not forget to subscribe. What I'm going to do is talk about basically, I'm going to mention all the books that I read during that time, but I'm only going to talk in depth on a couple of them basically. So the first one I'm going to mention, I really have to use my phone for this because I'm going to forget all the books, is My Darling from the Lions by Rachel Long. This is a poetry collection and I'm simply going to read what it says on Goodreads for you. It says, described as a narrative collection in 3 parts, My Darling from the Lions threads experiences of learning and unlearning, of shame, the body, sex, faith, blackness, lineage, prophecy and healing. I liked this poem collection. I like this poetry collection. There were bits that I just got completely confused in, and there were some really strong bits about basically blackness and like getting your hair done and things like that I really enjoyed. There were just other bits that I felt like were just some completely abstract that I was just lost in the poem. I was just like, I don't know what this poem is talking about. I did write a review for that poetry collection because it was a NetGalley arc, so I will link that down below, and I will just link all the books that I mentioned down below as well. So another book that I'm not going to talk about is Semiosis by Sue Burke. This is part of a duology, I'm pretty sure, so I still have to read the second book. So I think I'll just talk about it more when I end up reading the second book, because it is part of a collection and it is a sci-fi book. So the other book to speak about is How to Be a Man by Nicole Krauss. Funny story about Nicole Krauss. Clearly I didn't know how to read, and I always thought Nicole Krauss was Nicholas Krauss because I have read her book, I think it's called A Brief History of Love, before, and I really enjoyed it. Actually, when I went back home I wanted to pick it up again, but I was just like, I don't know if I'll have enough time to read all of that. So when I saw this kit come up, I was like, oh, I really enjoyed like that book from her, let me read this. This is a collection of short stories, and yeah, I gave it 3 stars each. The thing with me with sometimes with short story collections is a lot of the stories in this short story collection I found were quite abstract. There were some really good ones. There were ones that were just like going around in circles, and I was like, what is even going on here, and what does this mean? There was a lot of trying to derive meaning from some stories which I think probably didn't have a lot of meaning to them, but she's a really good writer, so I will give her that. A book I will actually speak about is Stubborn Archivist by Yara Rodriguez Fowler. The way this book has been put together is really lovely. It's kind of the kind of book that I think I would write if I ever was to write a book, which I won't, because it starts off with poetry, like from when she's younger, about, I guess, a guy that she was seeing at the time, and then it goes on to sort of be more prose-like and talk about her life. Yara is half Brazilian, if I am correct, and half English, and the back of this says, when your mother considers when your mother considers another country home, it's hard to know where you belong. When the people you live among can't pronounce your name, it's hard to know exactly who you are. And when your body no longer feels like your own, it's hard to understand your place in the world. A Stubborn Archivist tells her story through history, through family conversations, through the eyes of her mother, her grandmother, her aunt, and slowly she begins to emerge into the world. And yeah, so this is kind of like a coming of age novel slash, yeah, there are parts retold about like her grandma's life, her aunt's life, her mum's life, through the eyes of, I guess, people who actually saw it happening, because it can't be coming from her. I did find that quite jarring in the story, if I'm honest, so I'll go back and just summarize what this book also deals with. Obviously the fact that she is second gen, obviously her dad is English, she grew up in London, I want to say Tooting, I'm sure. Obviously there's that sort of disconnect between her growing up and having a Brazilian mother and having just basically holidays in Brazil, and her name and parts of her that are not English, and how she sort of deals with that, and how that's got, I won't say that she's outed or anything, I don't think she's ever made to feel that different, but some of her friends sometimes do make certain comments, especially when one of her friends goes to Brazil with her and talks about like it being dangerous or something like that. And then yeah, she talks about just growing up in the world as well, and just, yeah, the fact that, you know, people can't pronounce her name. When she does meet like other Portuguese people, they're so surprised that she does speak Portuguese, because they just assume that she speaks fluent English and knows nothing about her home at all. And then it also talks about like her IBS. She has IBS, and I guess that's quite like actually, it's gonna sound, I'm gonna be really rude, like I guess that's quite a big deal for her. I don't have IBS, so I don't know what it feels like, but it's clearly a crucial point to the story for her. And so that's the bit where it talks about your body no longer feeling like your own, and I think that's also tied with the beginning poems to do with a man that she was dating. I think he was significantly older than her, and I think perhaps there was some sort of sexual assault. It's never explicitly said, so I'm not sure if I've actually gathered that right. So it deals with a whole bunch of things. I liked the book. I felt like it was a nice way of exploring her life. like I said, I found the bits about her mum and her aunt to be quite jarring, because essentially a lot of this is coming from her perspective, but it's like, you weren't there, so have you embellished some of these stories? Is this exactly how it was told to you? I don't know. I didn't really like the format of exploring her mother's life or her aunt's life and stuff like that as if like she was there. She doesn't say I, it's told from the third person, but I think there could have been another way of weaving that story in and giving that history about her family. And I think the other thing that I didn't really enjoy about this book is it felt quite disconnected. Like, there was a lot of emotion tied to what she was going through. You can imagine it can feel quite lonely, like the times when she describes being at work and sort of like riding her bike to work and just not seeing a lot of friends and stuff like that. You get the sense that there is a lot of like emotion there, there's a lot of sadness there, but the book has this sort of disconnect between what is happening and how she's explaining it. So there's just a lack of emotion across the whole board for everything that she's describing, even when there are sad bits. Like, you just get the fact that she's very disconnected and not interested in life, and therefore as a reader I felt like I wasn't really interested and disconnected from a lot of the quite emotional things that were happening. But yeah, so she does tackle a lot to deal with this sort of immigrant experience, particularly from her mum, and like what it's like when her grandparents come and visit and what it's like when she goes and visits there. So I thought it was an interesting collection. I think it could have been better done. There's just an aspect of disconnect that I could have given this more stars if I felt like I heavily cared about a lot of the things happening here, and I didn't. Another book that I read and gave 3 stars is Bailey's Cafe by Gloria Naylor. I picked this up at recommendation from Books by Lena's, and you know, this book is I think it's got a touch of magical realism in it. Basically, it will explain it here. It says, welcome to Bailey's Cafe, where the food may not be much, but the ambience is graced by myth and magic. The cafe is home to Sadie, the ladylike alcoholic with a mania for cleanliness, to sweet Esther, who caters to unspeakable appetites in a nearby boarding house, taking payment only in white roses, and to Mariam, the Ethiopian child who may be the bearer of a miracle. This book basically deals with several characters. It actually starts off with the owner of Bailey's Cafe, this man, basically talking to us about how he met his wife. And instantly, when I first was reading these initial sort of pages in this initial chapter, I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like this book, because he talks a lot about sport. He talks about baseball. I think maybe he takes it to a game. And I honestly, my eyes just gloss over when people start talking about sport or writing about sport. I'm not interested, and I don't like any book that sort of deals with sport beyond a paragraph in a book. Like, I don't really care about what's happening in the game. I don't really ever find that any chapter that I've seen sports used has any significance to the rest of the story. So initially I was very, very bored. Then he talks about how he met his wife. His wife is quite funny. And together they, like, I think ended up taking over this cafe, and they own this cafe. And this cafe is basically like a stopping gap for all these different personalities. There's a lot of lives and characters in this book. It takes place in America, and I said essentially what it is a host of characters who have had traumatic experiences. So there's loads of trigger warnings here for rape, sexual assault, for beating people, what would you call that, for violence, there you go. I'm pretty sure there's also the dealing of the topic to deal with, I guess he dresses as a woman, so I don't think he is transgender. But this book tackles a lot. There's a lot of just raw, deep, hurtful pain in this book. A lot of these characters go through some really traumatic things. There's one of the themes or trigger warnings is definitely for addiction and drugs. And they all come to this cafe, and this cafe is kind of their stopping up, and we kind of hear from each character in each chapter, and then sometimes we hear from the main man who owns Bailey's Cafe telling us about their lives. I think my problem with this book was I found that every single character had a very grim story, and I wasn't here for it. I was just like, can someone not just have a novel story? It just felt like every single page that I'd heard, there was something more gruesome to be had, and I got a bit bored with it, I'm not gonna lie. There is also the element of, like, sort of, I guess, magical realism, which I didn't really like, I'm not gonna lie. I couldn't really work out. There's a sort of back door to the cafe where I guess if people step there, like, they're never seen again or something. I really couldn't work out the magical realism element, and I just didn't really like it. The writing in this is actually quite easy to follow, apart from like that initial sports aspect. So I found the writing to be fine. I think I just found overall the story had a lot going on. There were a lot of characters that she wanted to obviously write about and talk about this sort of cafe that they all kind of find solace in, the fact that, you know, they might all be on different person life, be kind of outcast in so many different places, but actually when they come to this cafe, no one really cares about that. Even though some of the other sort of residents or customers in the cafe do have things to say about some of the other ones, you know, calling them a whore because they're this and whatever. But overall, I just found it was quite chaotic. I couldn't deal with every single page of someone just having some sort of pain. And yeah, that's why I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't terrible, but it's not really a book that I would pick up again or read again. Same difference. Another book is this is Wishful Drinking by Carrie Fisher. I gave this 3 stars. If you know about Carrie Fisher's life, then you probably know what's in this book, but I found it so insightful. I didn't really know much about her. Like, I know she is, oh my god, Star Wars people are gonna kill me now. She's someone in Star Wars. Layla? I don't know, one of those. But this book was so interesting for the fact that her parents were Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, yeah, and talking about like sort of the Hollywood life and basically talking about what her life was like. This book is really short. It is, God, 150 pages long or something like that. There are some pictures in here as well. It's just so interesting to see like someone else's life, especially a girl that basically grew up in Hollywood, 2 really famous parents. And I think also her dad, he divorced her mum and was with Elizabeth Taylor for a bit. So it's just interesting to see these sort of celebrity names that you've seen in the newspapers, but actually someone who actually knew them and was speaking about their life and actually what went on. It deals with a lot. It deals with drinking, it deals with her bipolar diagnosis, her addiction, having her daughter, having one of her friends die. Obviously talks about her parents, talks about her brother, talks about so many different things. I really enjoyed this. It was just a really good insight into her life, but it definitely is the kind of book I think you read if you're a huge Carrie Fisher fan, and I found it enjoyable. The next book that I read and actually really enjoyed, I surprised myself with how much I enjoyed this, was The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. I've never read anything by her before. I thought this was going to be like a historical fiction, like Victorian sort of novel book about the house and maybe the house was haunted or something like that. That is not what this book is about, even though I have read the blurb before. It's about Danny. He grows up in the Dutch house, taken on by his father. Though his father is distant and his mother is absent, Danny has his beloved sister Maeve. Maeve, with her wall of black hair, her delicacy, her brilliance. Life is comfortable and coherent, played out under the watchful eyes of the house's former owners in the frames of their oil painting. Then one day, their father brings Andrea home. Her arrival will exact a banishment whose reverberations will echo for the rest of their lives. What this book about is basically the evil stepmother, essentially, and how these 2 kids basically get ousted from their home. Danny is probably about 3 years younger than Maeve, so by the time like Andrea is brought to their house, Maeve is in like her last year of college, which would be like university if you're in the UK, and so soon after she sort of finishes there, she gets a job and like basically moves out, and it's just about Danny and their life basically to do with this house. There's this sort of attachment to the house. It has its own sort of features. It talks about the fact that, you know, when their mum first came, how she didn't like the house. They have, I think, a maid and a cook as well, and sort of their attachment to the house. Basically, it's a lot to do with the house, how attached they are to the house, but I can't really say more without spoiling what happens, but there's also a sense of rightfulness and ownership over the house, and that's kind of what a lot of this book is centered on. I found this book to be so much more than just about their house. It's about Danny and Maeve's life, really. It's about Danny told from his perspective and their basically Maeve's fixation on the house. I really enjoyed this. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed her writing. I really want to pick up more from her. I think there's definitely Bel Canto, I think, that won the Women's Prize many moons ago when it was like the Orange Prize. There's the Commonwealth, which I always see as an audiobook for me to listen to on script, so I'm definitely going to pick up more of her writing, but I really enjoyed this. Like, to me, it's not what it says in this blurb here. It's a completely different book, but I still really enjoyed it nonetheless. Another book I read was Murder on Maternity by Holly Greenland. I really like this for a really light read. It's basically about a woman who is about to give birth. She attends these NCT classes. I don't know what NCT stands for. It's something they use in the UK for, you know, when you're having a baby, you go to all these classes with other women and their husbands and stuff like that. And she meets another woman there who is basically in the police force. She's a detective or something. This is set in the UK, by the way. And basically she ends up assisting her to solve crimes. There's someone going around basically killing people that are like sort of linked to them in their NCT class, and they're trying to find out basically who's the killer. And at one point you think they find it and then they don't. I thought it was quite clever. There were some bits I was a bit like, you're putting 2 + 2, but we're getting 5 here. I'm not really sure how we got here, but okay. But it's going to be part of a series, so I don't want to say too much about it, but it was such a light, easy read, and it's the kind of thing that actually, if it continues to be a couple more books, I might really enjoy. So I found that a good bit of light relief. And again, that was a NetGalley arc, so I think I will have a review written up on Goodreads. I'll also link that down below. The next book I'm going to speak about is Everything is Fucked, a book about hope by Mark Manson. I have not read his first book. I can't remember what it's called now, but I'll put it up here on the screen. But I got this when I went to that HarperCollins event, blah, 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 years ago, and I decided to pick it up because I thought, yes, let me finally get around to it. Full disclaimer, I did skip a whole chapter in this book. It is the chapter where he's basically bashing religion. I am not a religious person, but there does not need to be pages and pages and pages and pages of how you think religion is shit. Like, we get it. You told us in the first two, like, paragraphs, 2 pages. I don't know why the chapter went on for so long. Perhaps the chapter evolved, but I don't know. The reason why I felt happy enough to skip this book is because this book deals with, like, I guess, philosophers and other schools of thoughts, and he's put some of these together, and he's also embedded some of his own knowledge and his own thoughts in here. And so this is quite insightful for learning about, I guess, other schools of thoughts if you're not familiar with any of those things, like I am. And also, I guess, if you're interested in Mark Manson's opinion, it's good for that. I found this to be an okay read. So I was reading this book and, you know, I was learning new things that I hadn't actually thought about. And obviously I was getting his opinion on things. I think he's the kind of person that really likes to share his opinion and really likes to talk. And therefore, this book is great. It's this kind of book you do it in. But sometimes I just got the sense that he was talking for the sake of talking. And that is why when I got to that religion chapter, I was like, I don't think you're going to tell me anything new other than be quite kind of egotistical and sort of ramble about how much you think religion is shit. And it's just like, I don't really need to hear that. I don't think that's going to improve my learning. So a lot of it, I think the book is split into 2 different sections. It might be 3. Okay, so his first book was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. It's split into, 2 sections. First part is hope, the second part is Everything is Fucked. The first part very much focuses on, I guess, on the individual and talking about hope and the ways in which, I guess, your hope and that can change your life. The second section is what I found much more interesting, and it's called Everything is Fucked. And that is definitely much more based on society and how that, I guess, that changes the individual or shapes the individual. And I found it really, really interesting. I can't remember what the chapter was that I skipped because it can't be the final religion. I thought the second half was really, really strong. There are some great, like, thoughts in here. And the one that I remember the most is him talking about basically if as a society we evolve to sort of having, I guess, AI sort of determine things in our lives. He talks about basically how as a society and I guess maybe as individuals, how we think about how things happen to us. Like if there is a greater calling and therefore if I do X, that will appease X and therefore I will be happy. And he talks about here about like basically whatever society moves towards, in this case AI. I hope I'm not going to butcher what he actually said now, but we would still have that same thought because we would apply those beliefs to whatever we think is the greater power. So we'd start doing things to appease the algorithm, start believing that certain things appease the algorithm. So in that sense, everything is a bit fucked, because actually if you do believe there is a higher power and you do believe you have to act in certain ways to appease them, whatever that higher power is, you're going to still behave in certain ways. And therefore, essentially, we are fucked. Obviously, this is not applicable to everyone, but I quite like that thought. I'd never heard it before, so for me, this was completely brand new. If you're the kind of person that's already kind of well-versed in all these schools of thoughts, then you'll just be like, this is nothing new to me. But also, if you like Mark Manson's opinion, then it might be interesting to you. I found it interesting. This is definitely a book I will reread again. Like you can see, I've made a couple of sticky notes as well, because I did find some of it very enlightening. Another book that I read that I gave 3 stars is Murder in the Muse, 4 Cases of Hercule Poirot by Agatha Christie. And this contains 4 short stories. So I'm pretty sure I have seen all the ITV adaptations of these short stories. And yeah, so the short stories are The Incredible Theft, Dead Man's Mirror, Triangle at Rhodes, and then obviously the title Murder in the Muse. I really enjoyed all these stories, actually. I thought they were okay. I felt the first one was actually just a solid 2 stars, I'm not going to lie. But Dead Man's Mirror, really enjoyed, and I really enjoyed the ITV adaptation of it. And Triangle at Rhodes, I loved. When I saw the ITV adaptation one, it was so good. Actually, as a book, it's very short, and actually the book is probably a 2 stars. Obviously, they're all short stories, but I felt like this story was particularly short. But watch the ITV adaptation and you're just like, I don't think you'll guess who, like, what's going on. There's a love triangle, but it's not who you think it is. So the final book is actually one that I do have a physical copy of, but I have no idea where it is. But that is An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. Oh God, I think I completely butchered the pronunciation of her name. But I gave this 3 stars. I have seen this book flying around because obviously it won the Women's Prize for Fiction last year, I want to say. And also Time to Share Books really loves this book. And where did I pick this up from? I'm sure I picked it up in a charity shop. I'm pretty sure I did. So I thought, yeah, let me read it. And I did enjoy this book. I thought I was actually going to like it a lot more than I did. Right, the camera ran out of battery, so that's always great. This is an epistolary novel, and it is basically, in the beginning, it's told just as normal prose, and then the middle to slash 3/4 of the novel is told through a series of letters, and then the last bit is just a regular novel. I think there's a bit of a last letter at the end. Now, I really like the bits where they write letters. I love books that use letter writing to tell their narrative. And for me personally, the letter part was where I saw the most emotion. It's so nice to see how their lives change through what they say in their letters, but also the sort of tone, the length of their letters, and just there was just so much passion and feeling in their letters. What this book largely deals with, you know, it obviously deals with the incarceration of black men for crimes that they didn't commit, but it doesn't really deal with that. What this book really, I think, takes a good look at is love, but mainly marriage, and those vows that you take in when you're you know, saying your I do's and stuff like that, and the strength of those vows, the meaning of the vows that you have taken, because, you know, it's all in sickness and health, for better or for worse, and all of those things. It really is about, in the face of something that is so unexpected that you never could have planned for, what happens to your marriage. Now, bear in mind, this book is about Roy and Celeste. So they're a newly married couple. They've been married for about a year, and this happens. And I think what Tayari really wanted to explore is, how strong are your vows? Like, how committed are you to the vows that you took, regardless of what has now happened? Because also, don't forget, it is not like Roy has committed a crime that he has done. You know, Roy, what? It's not like Roy has committed a crime. You know, he's actually done the crime and he's paying for it, and, you know, she's decided to wait for him and whatnot. Roy is being falsely accused, and I think that adds another element to whether or not you leave your marriage. Obviously, I can't say without ruining the book for you what happens between Roy and Celeste, but it very much pushes the boundaries of their marriage. And I think what Tayari really tries to do is build an outer world, in the sense that Roy is brought up by his stepdad and his mum, but they have a really strong marriage, and you sort of see how many ways, I guess, marriage and relationships can exist through that. But also you have Celeste's parents, who are, I think they're both still together, I'm going to say. Yes, they are. But also the story of how Celeste's parents came together, again, makes you look at marriage, relationships, and how these things are formed. And then there's also another character in there called Andre, who is Celeste's best friend from when she was younger. And you also see sort of about his life and his parents. They are split up, and his dad has another family, and there's a scene sort of where Andre goes to his dad's house, and, you know, he talks about sort of being in their family home. So it very much makes you look at relationships, families, and how, you know, they just differ from the norm. It very much makes you look at families, how units are built, marriages, relationships, and love, and all of that. Now, there are some like other twists and turns in here. I'll tell you, in this book there is a character that just does people dirty. Celeste, you have to kind of side-eye her as well. I think the overwhelming sense you get from this book is how unfair life is to Roy. Because there is no way you can look at the situation that he goes through and ever think, maybe you brought that on yourself. I will say this, he very much pushes for his marriage. He very much believes in the sort of unity, the sanctity of marriage. And it was a very interesting book. I think it explored it in a really nice way. I just found it didn't hit the mark for me. Like, I thought I did like it. I would actually read it again, but I thought I was going to get more. And I think for me, what would have strengthened this book actually would have been more letter writing at the end, a bit more of the story at the end and more letter writing. And I think that would have definitely strengthened the story for me. But it definitely was enjoyable. Her writing is really easy to get through. I keep coming back to the title of it, An American Marriage, and, you know, thinking about America just because of what's going on right now with the elections. I think this will probably go up after the elections in the US, but also with the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, and thinking about that title, An American Marriage, and the issues that Roy goes through as a black man, you know, being falsely incarcerated. And there's also a very interesting plot twist when he's in prison as well that also ties in very nicely to sort of black men and incarceration. But yeah, I just kept coming back to that title, An American Marriage, and I kept, you know, just kept circling it back in my mind and just thinking, wild, because I think this is so apt. Obviously there are so many marriages, it plays out in so many ways, but I feel like what an apt title. Just the title on its own is such a deep thing to think about when you think about the story, when you think about black men being falsely incarcerated, but also marriage. Does this story really signify like America for black people? Because to be honest, the thought of that is really sad. Reading this book, it doesn't end you with a happy point if you think that that's what an American Marriage is. But that is all the books that I read sort of during the time that I was off Booktube that I gave 3 stars. The next video you'll see from me is all the books that I gave 1 or 2 stars. I think those are significantly less. Low-key kind of scared about talking about those books. I'm not going to bash them, like, too bad. But one book, whew. But anyway, that is all from me today. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know your thoughts about them. Let me know any sort of 3-star reads that you have read recently. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another video. Bye.